Hi, and welcome to Outstanding Women Leaders, Witty and Wise Conversations, Season 6. I'm your host, Katie L. Leeds, founder and chief owl at Outstanding Women Leaders, professional coaching and podcast, an organization dedicated to empowering women in leadership, relationships, and life. Owl is on a mission to host 100 million witty and wise conversations that inspire you, disrupt the way leaders think, and stir your soul into aligned action. We have 4 rules for our conversation today. Nobody gets to be right. Nobody gets to be wrong. Everybody gets to be vulnerable. And my favorite rule, everything is included here. We do not edit. This conversation is exactly what it needs to be in this moment in time. We've asked our guests to join us via video to allow us to create authentic connection. Eyes are the window to the soul. You will be seen here. It will be heard. There is space for you. When this conversation comes to a close, I will ask our guests 3 questions. If you've tuned in before, you know what they are. And if you haven't, you don't want to miss them. But enough about me. Today, I'm excited to welcome outstanding women leader Amy Jackson. Amy has spent her career building and shaping brands during times of rapid change. She helped potato farmers navigate the era of low-carb diets. She secured coverage in major media outlets leading up to the acquisitions of Bebo and Mint.com, and led Living Social's PR efforts, bridging from Facebook during to local merchant marketplace. Over the course of 8 years with SAP Concur, Amy built TripIt's high-performing PR and social program from scratch, all of which led to coverage in the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Bloomberg Businessweek, and NBC, to name a few. Amy created TaleSplash to help emerging tech, health, and lifestyle brands share their expertise about the world changing around us. With decades of experience in PR growing global technology brands as storytellers and digital strategists, clients like to think of TaleSplash as an extension of the team that can help in a multitude of ways. She lives in the Austin Hills country with her husband, 2 boys, and a labradoodle. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Katie.
Excited to hear a little bit about your backstory of how you decided to found a company. Talk us through that journey. There's a lot of women that would love to exit their 9 to 5 and create something that's their own.
Yeah, it was stories like these about other women that had done it before me that really gave me the courage to do it myself. So, when I was in a corporate role, I had a blog where I would interview moms about their work life, whether that was in a similar corporate situation to myself at the time, or whether they were an entrepreneur, or maybe both. And that was actually what I learned is that a lot of women in motherhood were not only building their careers and their families, but in a lot of cases, they were starting really innovative companies. And I talked to so many of them over the course of the pandemic. Honestly, it was the thing that really got me excited and gave me a little glimmer of hope during the pandemic when, so many of us were kind of stuck at home trying to keep ourselves busy. And over the course of that year, I just kind of kept hearing similar messages about you're never going to feel perfectly ready, just like you do with motherhood. You kind of have to take the leap and have faith that you will figure it out as you go. And that's really something that I think more women, need to hear, is that you don't have to be perfectly ready to become a business owner. Everybody is starting from scratch, whether it's their first business or their 10th business. You're always learning as you go. And there are so many people out there and resources. And now with AI, it's just like endless the places that you can go to get the answers that you need, because every day you're going to be doing things that you've never done before.
Hmm.
So yeah, that's how I got the courage.
Yeah, and I always love to hear like what was that like when you took the leap, what resistance did you meet? What was pulling you towards it? What were your
Mhm.
feelings around it? And oftentimes like, there's the 20% that makes the 80% difference. Like what was the
Mm.
thing that really set you up for success?
Yeah, I think over the course of my career, I saw a pattern of people coming to me for PR advice within the company I worked for at the time. They really associated me with PR. And so that became like my personal brand in a way. And so I felt like, not only was there an opportunity to give the PR skills that I had honed over the course of my career to founders that were just starting their own business journeys themselves and really help them tell their story. I also realized like that enough people thought of me in that way. That was sort of my brand reputation, if you will, that I could probably leverage that to build the business. And sure enough, most of my first clients were people that I knew from my own network, or they were referred from within my network. And so it was a combination of kind of reading the room and seeing what people associate you with, just like I think every brand should do, listen to what people are saying about you, and that's part of what your brand is. And then also leverage that with if you're building a business that relies on, those referrals and personal connections to build the business.
Yeah, I always love to hear women who have networks that kind of show up and support them. And
Mhm.
I imagine that sometimes that comes from where you least expect it. What type of advice do you have for women that are looking to activate their network and get started?
So when I worked for a large company, every time I was in a meeting with a group of people, even if I had never worked with them before, I would connect with them on LinkedIn. And so over the course of 8 to 10 years, I had built out a lot of connections on LinkedIn of former coworkers, vendors I had worked with, people that I had met at events. Like anytime I met someone, whether it was on a conference call or at an event or elsewhere, I would connect with them on LinkedIn. And so over time, I kind of built this, growing community of people that I had met over the years. And you never know where people will end up, right? Everybody's kind of constantly reinventing themselves and making changes in their own careers. And so it's really amazing to see how those connections that may have started, decades ago are coming back full circle and becoming, people that are really valuable to reconnect with now.
That's a great reminder of what I tell everyone is when you enter corporate, and this is where I see Gen Z really different from millennials, is you're entering to get experience. And
Hmm.
experience is a LinkedIn list. I hear
Yeah.
you're very intentional. Did you always
Yes.
know that someday I'm going to be a mom and my priorities are going to change and I'm going to want my own business? Is that
I did
is
not.
just this is just a natural talent that you have?
Well, it was what I attribute it to other people giving me that courage, but really it was, going back to I don't know if I ever predicted I would start my own company, but there was always an interest in, the idea of creating something new. So that did become a business because I was always interested in creating things, like whether I was in a corporate setting where I was creating a program that didn't exist before or building on a team. I always liked that experience of building something new. And so I don't think I pegged myself early on as an entrepreneur, but then when I did get the courage to do it, it was so natural because I had practiced that, building from scratch exercise as someone in corporate. So going back to like what can Gen Zs do or what can someone early in their career do? Use your corporate role to kind of play around and figure out what you like to do and what lights you up. And if you really feel passionate about something and people see you as the expert on that thing, those are great beginnings of a business.
Mm. Yeah. So what I hear is like the business finds you, you don't find the business.
Yeah, I mean, that's what happened to me. I think the other thing was timing. It was, a combination of like when I was driving around with like little babies, I was listening to How I Built This and getting all these ideas about entrepreneurship. I was really inspired by moms that were building companies. And, it was the pandemic and coming out of the pandemic when I really started to reassess. Like we relocated from Northern California to Austin, and I was looking around at all these entrepreneurs and business owners, and it all kind of clicked, this idea of, oh, all of these interesting business owners and entrepreneurs, like they need a PR agency that's built for them. They aren't ready for the big global agency yet, but they have such interesting origin stories for their business, or they're just really knowledgeable and have expertise that journalists need. And there were things that happened coming out of this like era of remote work during the pandemic where really great platforms were created for journalists to connect with sources and for journalists to find great products to review. And so some of it was like the technology was in place too to build a PR agency from scratch with a small team and be able to serve clients all over the country and in some cases over the world too.
I always talk about timing when everyone thinks about entrepreneur ventures as well. And
Yeah.
in the world of corporate, force is kind of the game. And
Hmm.
they use what I call linear logic, which is that
Hmm.
everything needs to be linear,
Yeah.
and but logic is a circle and event. And so I'm curious, like, how did you intentionally decorporate yourself? I guess for me, I never worked in corporate. I just supported a school system, which is very similar to working
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
corporate. And so when I support so many people there, and what I see when someone wants to leave is that they bring some of the same corporate BS that they had in building the first company, and they do it under the name of professionalism and looking polished. And
Mhm.
yeah, what's your journey been there?
Yeah, I think I was similar in the early days of the business where I felt like when I got on a call with a client, I had to be like really like not formal, but like really professional and kind of had to get right into the agenda and like be on top of all the things I wanted to talk about. And what I've learned over the years is like the relationships that last and the clients that have been with us for several years, those are the ones that we have a real human connection to. So sometimes it's more important to have the lighter conversations that are more personal in nature. And then, make sure you cover the important topics that you want to cover from a business standpoint, but don't make that the only thing that you talk about in your 30 minutes together because those weekly calls or those biweekly calls like that's the basis of your relationship with them. And so if you're only focused on what you need to get done, then there's really not a lot else to the relationship and it's somewhat commoditized at that point.
Mm. Yeah, I always remind people that Google Cloud did a study on high performing teams, and they go on tangents and they,
Mhm.
waste the first 10 minutes of meetings joking
Yeah.
around and talking about their families, etc. So
Yeah.
it's a good reminder. And when does a founder say, "Ooh, I need to hire Amy Jackson. I need this PR." And how do you see sort of the evolution of a company and how your agency supports them?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think people in general don't really know a lot about how PR works unless they're in the industry. And so it's one of those things where you often get an inkling that you need it unless you've done it before, if you've been through the experience of working with an agency before, or, you've seen it kind of work really well. Most people that come to us don't have a lot of context for what they are looking to do together. They just have this hunch. And so, it's a lot of just us educating different situations where we can describe what can be done together and the impact of that. And it's not something where people kind of come to us with like, here's what I want, here's when I want to get this like in place by it. So they're sort of curious when they come to us, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, what kind of questions do you see founders, asking or pondering at night? I can, my background, I've written my fair share of press releases when I was an
Yeah.
executive director, but
Yeah.
that's about the extent of my PR work.
Yeah, no, that's a perfect example. Like people know what a press release is, but they don't really know, why you would put a press release out. What are the situations where a press release makes sense and how do you make it successful? So you're not just kind of putting it out there, putting it on your website and like hoping people notice. So much has changed just even with press releases because of AI. So now if you put a press release out over the wire, which we highly recommend doing when you have something significant happening within the company, it makes it discoverable not only by search engines, but now by LLMs and AI search tools. And we've had scenarios where, like, a national news producer saw a press release that we put out, called my phone number, my cell phone, which is on the press release. And as a result, our client was featured on Lester Holt's, evening news program. So those, even just that simple act of putting a press release out when done right can be very powerful. But kind of to the outside world, people think of that as like a document and they don't really know like what goes into it, what you do with it, and how does it really, help your business. And so that's where strategy comes in because the, members of my team, like we all have decades of experience doing this. So we've seen so many different scenarios where if you time it a certain way, if you make an announcement, a certain week of the month, or if you choose a certain day of the month. Like there's all these little decisions that go into announcing news. It's not as simple as just, we're going to make this announcement, we're going to put it on our website. Also, who you're sending it to. You don't want journalists to hear from you for the first time ever because you have news that you want them to write about. You want them to have heard from you over and over again, but in a way where you're giving them value and you're helping them out. So you're offering them, your founder, your executive as a resource for the stories that they're already working on. So there's a lot of groundwork that needs to be laid before you even make this announcement. So these are just like some of the conversations that we have, even just for the, very simplest kind of PR tool there is, but there's so many other things that you can do to connect with journalists, to connect with podcasts, to get your message out outside of a press release. So that's just one example of all the things that are possible with PR.
Hmm. And you are focused primarily on supporting women businesses. Is that right? And tell me a little,
So
yeah.
we have had a track record of working with a lot of women-owned businesses. We don't exclusively, and it's not something where it's like, we say we only work with women-owned businesses. It's just happened to be the case. And part of that is because, women like working with women. We are a team of women, and it's just like a natural connection, and we relate to each other too, because a lot of us are in that season of life where we're busy with families and we don't have um the time that sometimes people do when they don't have the level of responsibilities that we do. And so we tend to kind of speak the same language. Like when we get on a call, it's like we get things done and and then we get back to the families that need us. But also um I am a member of a lot of different organizations that are a lot of women building businesses because I personally find it valuable as a business owner. So that's also led to a lot of great clients that we now work with.
Yeah. And how are you baking that into your business model? And tell us a little bit. I think a lot of times women leave a corporate and they build a company. It's like, am I scaling? Am I selling it? Like, what am I building? Tell us a little bit about how you decided what your mission was going to be there and where you want to take your business.
I think it's interesting to watch things unfold somewhat organically. So I think you start with a hypothesis, right? In the early days, it was like, we're going to help founders tell their stories. Their stories are what help them make a splash. And then over time, we've now worked with a lot of companies that are not necessarily startups. And there's always an opportunity to help companies with great products and great services and great people on their teams be a resource for journalists. So that's always been the constant thread throughout our 5 years is that we are always looking for ways to connect the dots between our clients and journalists and podcasts in a way that there's a win-win for everybody involved. And so that kind of like mission, if you will, is something that's always stayed the same. But I think the way we have focused in on companies that we think we're a good fit for has changed and evolved. So now we talk about the fact that we really love supporting brands that are making life easier, healthier, and safer. And that's because a lot of our clients are either, creating things to help people save time or do things better. They're making products that are better for you, or there's a real focus on women's health. And that's something that we're passionate about across the team because many of us are in the stage of life where we are thinking about our health in a different way and the health of our families. And so if we can support brands that are also doing that in a meaningful way, then it just gives us that, feeling that we are helping more people than just, the number of people within our team or the clients that we work with directly. And then there's, a real value around, brands that are making things safer too, because we have kids and we want the world to be safe for them. So that's where it stems from.
That makes me think of a founder that I want to introduce you to them.
Oh, nice.
Just making social media safer for kids.
Awesome.
Um, You've been around for 5 years. I like how you tell the story of like letting it unwind and unravel. Like my first company, I wasn't like, I'm going to be internationally recognized for this specific thing. Like that sort of found us. But
Yeah.
there was, some ambitions around what it was we were building. Where do you see yourself? Like from what you've learned in the first 5 years, what do you see yourself for the next five?
Yeah, I think, we've learned that there's certain types of companies that are going to have a really great experience working with us. And we've had to learn that the hard way in some cases where, we are not for everyone. And I think it's hard when you're first starting out. You want to just say yes to every opportunity that comes your way as a business owner. And we've had to learn like, there are certain similarities between, the relationships that we have that have really stood the test of time. And so my plan is really to keep growing the business in a sustainable way that prioritizes those kinds of relationships. And yet at the same time, we are always adapting to change. And so when we see a trend or we see like a concentration of interest in one thing, then we're going to be open to designing, new kind of channels around that. So a perfect example is podcasts. We love doing podcast interviews ourselves and we love booking our clients on podcasts because it gives you a much more in-depth conversation to talk about, whatever it is that your expertise or your product or your service are doing and who you're helping. And that is not something that can be done with traditional media. With traditional media, you typically are part of a larger topic, you're part of a larger conversation that's happening. And so you might be one of several products that are featured, or you might be one of several experts that are interviewed. And so there's a really nice opportunity with podcasts to have more of that, nuanced conversation. And because we are meeting so many business owners and brands that feel the same way as we do about podcasts, that's become like its own thing for our company. And so now we're working with a lot of brands and experts that really want to start with podcasts first and foremost. And then maybe there's appetite for more traditional media later, but they kind of want to get things going and get some podcasts under their belt.
Mm. Yeah, I find a lot of the women founders, when I first meet them, there's always this, I need to get this perfect. Let me start in this ecosystem before I want to play in the other ecosystem. What
Yeah.
advice do you have for women of just attracting attention by being themselves and not necessarily quite so polished?
Yeah, well, the reality is that it's your differentiators, it's what makes you unique that will help you both in PR and brand building. So it's like one of the fundamentals of brand strategy is looking at your differentiators, not what you're doing that's the same as those that are also, offering the same products or services as you, but what are you doing that's different? That is what's going to resonate both with journalists in any sort of podcast conversation. I think where the conversation always takes an interesting turn, right? Is like, oh, well, tell me more about that. I haven't heard about that before. It's like, what are you offering that's new and different? And so that is not something that you have to have a ton of practice talking about. If it's truly unique to you, like that's yours, and that should feel very organic and natural for you to talk about. And I think a lot of women just don't give themselves enough credit that there is something that they are doing that's really unique and different. And if they can figure out what that is, just focus on that. You already know it. You don't need to be perfectly polished to talk about it.
Hmm. I have three personal brand questions I send my clients on to ask. I'm going to see what questions you have. I'm curious. But the questions I have them ask everybody is, what do I do better than anybody else you know?
Yes. Yes.
I will have them ask, what are three words that come to mind when you think of me?
Mhm.
And then the last one, if I was the most impactful and valuable boss you've ever had, what are two more words that will come to mind later? So I'm curious, like, what kind of things do you have would have you have people explore in order to really just own your strengths versus, oh, maybe I'm okay at that thing.
Yeah. Well, what's interesting about the way we work is I've done those sort of like brand questionnaires in the beginning, but what I find more interesting is seeing what journalists pick up on as being different and unique. And so
Mm.
we'll sometimes like take a guess. Like, for example, when I worked with a brand very early on in the tenure of TaleSplash, they were making these really adorable like children's boots with vegan cactus leather. And I could tell like vegan cactus leather was not mainstream at that point in time. And I wouldn't say it's mainstream yet, but it's like it's so interesting and unique that I put that right in the beginning of the subject line when I was sending pitches to journalists. And sure enough, like that was the thing that hooked them. So sometimes but what's even more fun is to see what journalists kind of pick up on because they're the ones that are evaluating all these products
Mm-hmm.
and kind of positioning them differently from each other. So it's really fun to see what they notice in, each of the brands that they're reviewing. And they can be really spot on with like what we're hoping that they will, highlight or talk about. So even in like skincare, for example, we work with a really wonderful hand cream that's on like every grocery store shelf. And the journalists that we've been working with lately, like they have nailed it. Like they'll be like, this is the best for manual labor, or like this is the best like for men's grooming products. Like they just sometimes like they get it because they've tried it and they can experience whatever that is that's, special and unique themselves. So that's kind of my favorite is like, what do the journalists see that makes you unique and special? And that just rounds out what you know about yourself or what you've been building. But to have that third party validation around what makes you unique and special, like that's priceless.
Yeah, that's why I always tell people they're not an influencer, they're the influenced. You got to go to the actual people that are doing the influencing.
Yeah.
My version of that in corporate is to go ask their kids.
Yeah. No, that it's so funny. So I just did career day last week for fourth graders. I've done it with kindergarten, and this time I did it with fourth graders. And it's really fun to see what questions different, ages of elementary school kids will ask about PR because it's a perfect place to practice. Like, how do you describe what PR is to people that, have not even heard of it before? And with a room full of kids, like it is fascinating what they will ask about. And the fourth graders were so smart. I was like, wow, these kids have a bright future.
Yeah, that's why I like parents to ask their kids what they do better than anybody else they know. So then
Yeah.
the next time the parent feels guilty about missing the game, I'm like, they didn't say that you made the games better than anybody else, you know. They said you made mac and cheese better, whatever
Yes.
the thing is. And it's always
Yeah.
depending on the age, it's fun to hear what the kids say because it reminds you of like that's your personal brand with your
Yeah.
child, not what you
Yes.
thought it was. It was
Yeah.
not the ice cream and the toys at Christmas.
You're right. Absolutely. It's like what people remember about you.
Yeah, and that's the
Yeah.
part of the narrative that we don't necessarily get to control, and it is fun to continuously seek that feedback. Um,
Absolutely.
and as we wrap up here, I'm going to ask my three favorite questions. I can't wait to hear. What is your favorite? I'm sorry. What is your superpower?
My superpower is helping people feel calm.
Hmm. So someone to call when there's a PR nightmare as well.
Yes.
What's your purpose in the world?
Oh, goodness. My purpose, I believe, is to connect things together that are like hidden gems. I
Hmm.
love to connect a hidden gem with someone that recognizes the potential.
That reminds me, there was a magazine when I moved here called Hidden Gems of Knoxville, and they did a little write up on me. I love that. Hidden
Nice.
Gems.
Yeah.
What's next for you?
Oh goodness. I mean, summer. Like I'm trying to figure out how, summer's always an interesting time to like blend family life and work life in a season where the reality is that everyone else is trying to figure it out too. So it's like, how do you take this time where you have a little more family time than usual? And how do you not, have the business and family life kind of feel at odds with each other? So like last summer, for example, I spent the time really like embracing what we were doing as a family, like spending more time in nature. And I was listening to a lot of podcasts and audiobooks, and it was so inspiring that I like took that and applied it to like a complete brand like refresh we did with our website. So I think those times where you could look at it as a challenging season, I think can be really inspirational. And so that's what I'm looking forward to again, like this summer is, time to kind of slow down, be present with my family, but also really think about what's next for the business. And, we have, I think, good indicators of what's to come based on what's been happening, in the year so far. But summer's just a nice reset.
That's some good advice for women, particularly those that are still in corporate, thinking about exiting, looking for that inspiration. In many ways, it goes against our nature. Summer is supposed to be harvest time. It's supposed to be when you're working the hardest. And as a mom, you technically are working the hardest, right?
Kind of different.
And it's hard in the seasons of life in winter where we would like to do less. We're usually called to do more in the winter because we're not outside as much. Although you're in Texas, so your seasons are a little different.
Our seasons are wacky here.
But I always like to leave our guests with a last word, any piece of wisdom that you'd like to leave.
I like to say something that I have figured out I learned a long time ago. I wrote it in a book when I was in like sixth grade, and it was this idea of like never give up, just keep going, like just keep going. And there's a book out right now for kids called Just Keep Going that's really sweet.